What's going on, my fantasy footballers? And welcome to another video for the love of fantasy football, where I, Richie K, your boy, take you through the ins and the outs of fantasy football. Whether you're a rookie and it's your first year playing fantasy football, or you're a veteran and you just want a little bit more insight knowledge about fantasy football, I'm your guy, and this is the channel for you. If you're new to the channel, welcome, hello, how you doing? I'm Richie K, your boy, and this is For the Love of Fantasy Football. I just gotta say, what a wild journey my heart went through during the Dallas Cowboys and Atlanta Falcons football game. Not once in my entire life did I ever see a comeback of that nature from the Cowboys. I know we saw it from the New England Patriots a couple years ago in the Super Bowl against the Atlanta Falcons. Shout out my boy Mikey. Love you, bud. But anyways, that game was insane, and I hope the Cowboys can build off of this win, especially for this upcoming game against the Seattle Seahawks. Anyways, let's get into it. Last week, I told you about a handful of players that you should start in your fantasy lineup that are going to produce on Sunday and on your fantasy football team. And boy, was I right. I had Josh Allen, Tom Brady, Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, Calvin Ridley, Malcolm Brown, Ronald Jones, Noah Fant, and the fantasy starter of them all, other than Josh Allen and Calvin Ridley, Jonnu Smith. I told y'all Jonnu Smith was going to get a lot of targets and a lot of receiving yards and a touchdown. I love it when I'm right. Anyways, let's go ahead and get into the players that didn't do so well in week 2 of the NFL football season. First off, let's talk about Tom Brady. I said last week that Tom Brady was going to have a monster game against the Panthers defense. Unfortunately, that wasn't true. And I'm sorry for those who decided to start him in your fantasy lineup and ended up taking the loss. However, there is cause for some positives in starting Tom Brady over the course of the season. One is that he's not going to be facing top-notch defenses all the time. Now, I'm not saying that the Panthers are a top-notch defense, which they for sure are not. What I am saying is that Tom Brady should have had over 300 yards passing and a few more touchdowns in that game on Sunday, but his receivers dropped a lot of balls, and he definitely could have had a much bigger game against a suspect Panthers defense. The next player is Tom Brady's teammate, Ronald Jones. I thought Ronald Jones was going to have a monster game as well due to playing against the Panthers defense. Although he did have a touchdown in the game, he only had 30 yards in total offense, rushing and receiving, and he actually fumbled the ball, which gave way to Leonard Fournette taking most of the rushing and receiving snaps. So I do expect Leonard Fournette to start taking over the starting running back role for the Buccaneers offense. The next player that I thought was going to do very well in week 2 of the NFL season, but didn't live up to the expectations, was Malcolm Brown. In week 1, when they were playing against the Dallas Cowboys, Malcolm Brown showed that he can carry the load for the team and be their starting running back. And it looked really good in week 2 against the Philadelphia defense until he got hurt, which took him out for the rest of the game, which bumped Darrell Henderson all the way up to taking the rest of the offensive snaps. However, I do believe if Malcolm Brown would have stayed in the game, he would have shown and provided you more fantasy points and better production for your team. And the last player that I thought was going to have a monster game, but didn't this past Sunday, was Robert Woods. If you just look at the score of the Rams and the Eagles game, you would think that there would be so much more production out of the players on the Rams offense that players like Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods would have over 100-yard games. However, that wasn't true. Jared Goff only attempted 27 passing attempts and completed only 20 of them with less than 300 yards passing, and Tyler Higbee and Cooper Kupp were the main targets for Jared Goff. Robert Woods did salvage his day with a rushing touchdown. However, he only had just over 30 yards rushing and receiving. So if it was not for that touchdown he scored, his overall production was just straight garbage. Now let's get into the players that I said were going to have great days on Sunday and actually did. These players were Josh Allen, Cooper Kupp, Calvin Ridley, Noah Fant, and my boy, Jonnu Smith. As you can see right here, Josh Allen had a monster game against the Miami Dolphins defense. Over 400-yard passes, 4 touchdowns, and he even rushed for almost 20 yards, which, adds more points for your fantasy team. As the season continues on, I do expect, like I said last week, Josh Allen to continue to have performances like this because he is going to be playing against suspect secondaries that won't give him too much trouble defending him. Next up, we have Cooper Kupp. Like I said last week, I was expecting Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods to have very good days against the Philadelphia defense. Fortunately, only Cooper Kupp really did, where he had 5 receptions and over 80 yards and was the main target for Jared Goff in the Rams offense. Being the number one receiver in the Rams offense means that Cooper Kupp is expected to have even better production compared to what he performed on Sunday. This next player, I specifically said, is going to have a huge day on Sunday, and he really did. This next player is Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley had 7 receptions for 109 yards and 2 receiving touchdowns. This man torched Dallas' secondary, and I told y'all he would. Fortunately, the Cowboys didn't end up winning that game 40-39. Calvin Ridley should be starting on your fantasy football team week in and week out because of the amount of targets he gets and just because he is a very fast and dynamic football player. And lastly, the 2 tight ends that I specifically said we're going to have monster games in week 2 of the NFL football season did. And that was Noah Fant and Jonnu Smith. I told y'all Noah Fant was going to have a great game, and he did. He had 4 receptions for almost 50 yards and a touchdown, even with Drew Lock being out for most of the game. I do expect even more production from Noah Fant because Courtland Sutton is now out for the rest of the year due to a torn meniscus. But if you have Noah Fant on your team and one of the players you have on your starting lineup, like Saquon Barkley or Courtland Sutton, got hurt, you could try to use Noah Fant as trade bait to get another player to replace your injured players. And last up, Jonnu Smith. Jonnu Smith had the best game amongst all tight ends. He had 5 receptions, over 90 yards, and 2 touchdowns. This man was a baller on Sunday. I really did not expect him to have that type of production, but Ryan Tannehill is actually doing much better this season as a passer and is going to continue looking for Jonnu Smith to catch the ball in the end zone. So that was a recap of the week 2 NFL players that I thought were going to have monster games and did. Let's go ahead and take a quick dive into the waiver wire pickups you should be adding to your team. Let's start off with Gardner Minshew. I told y'all last week to start picking him up, and he had a monster game. If Gardner Minshew is still there in the waiver wire, pick him up immediately. Next up, Dion Lewis or Devontae Freeman. Saquon Barkley is out for the entire year due to a torn ACL. So look for Dion Lewis, Devontae Freeman, or even Wayne Gallman to pick up the starting running back role in the Giants offense. The next running back I think you should pick up is Darrell Henderson. Cam Akers and Malcolm Brown both went out of the game on Sunday against the Eagles with injuries. And when Darrell Henderson came into the game, he actually had a monster game, which I expected Malcolm Brown to have, but Henderson ended up having it. So try to pick up Darrell Henderson off the waiver wire. A couple of tight ends that I think you should start looking at to pick up is Mike Gesicki, tight end of the Miami Dolphins, and Mo Alley-Cox, tight end for the Indianapolis Colts. Both these players had amazing games on Sunday. Now, I know I said not to chase points earlier in my videos, but due to the amount of targets that these players had, I think it is a good idea to pick them up and stash them on your bench until they start to have more repetitive production in their respective offenses. And lastly, 2 receivers that I think you should pick up off the waiver wire and add them onto your bench is Kendrick Bourne, wide receiver for the 49ers, and Russell Gage, wide receiver for the Falcons. Both of these players had lots of targets from their respective quarterbacks, and I expect them to continue to have the same amount of targets, which means more receiving yards and receptions and more points for your fantasy football team. Lastly, I would go into the top starters for week 3 of the NFL season. However, due to so many injuries happening over the last couple weeks of the season, it would be really difficult to try to pinpoint each game and find the fantasy starters that I truly think are going to have big games. So what I'm going to suggest is going onto ESPN.com or NFL.com, looking at the fantasy part of their website and finding out what players you should start on your fantasy team. Next week's video will be a lot better in that aspect of the video because I'll have more of an understanding of who's starting for their respective NFL teams and who's having good games and who's having bad games and so on and so forth. But for this week, because of the events that happened and occurred over the past 2 weeks with all of the injuries, it's just not a good idea. However, basing it off the matchups that I see for week 3, I do like some of the players such as like Josh Kelly and Austin Eckler. I do like Josh Jacobs as well. I like Cam Newton this week against the Raiders defense. If Herbert does start for the Chargers, I expect him to have a really good game as well. And again, Jonnu Smith and Noah Fant should have really good games because they're going to be main targets in their offenses. So to finish off this video, like we always do, I just want to say thank you so much to all of you, my subscribers, and all of you that are watching this video. I appreciate all the love and support that you have shown my channel. So if you liked the video, like the video. Subscribe to my channel, hit the little bell icon so you know when I upload my videos. Comment in the comment section down below as to what players you think are going to have great games for week 3 of the NFL season. And as per usual, may your Sundays be epic.